everyone, and welcome to the Centrist Post. My name is Lauren Kamel Morris. I'm your host, and we like to call this channel a place where we can have a dialogue in a radical world. And today we have a special guest, Jeff Nyquist. Thank you for gracing us with your presence again and giving us your time.
Thanks for inviting me.
So I'm going to spring something on you here,
Okay.
and we're going to do this first. It's kind of a scoop. I have a scoop, and we're going to do this first, and then we'll get into, maybe talking about Ukraine. But I'm going to share my screen right here. Okay. Now, what we have here is we have a group of people that recently in Texas stormed an ICE facility. And they had guns, they were armed up, and this is what they look like. And evidently, two of them are transgender people over here. This one,
I see one Neanderthal man there too.
yeah, look at him. And we have some other
That's not
mutants. This guy looks familiar, but it's interesting. So we have one, two, three, four actual women. One, two, three, four actual men, and then these two are in transition at some point. So anyway, one of them blabbed when he got caught. They were trying to flee the scene, and so what these people did was they went and they were going to storm an ICE facility.
armed with weapons.
Armed. They were armed up, okay? And so one of the guys that they caught, he had inside of his van, his name was Morris, they found a revolver, two AR-15s, two Kevlar vests, a ballistic helmet, and a loaded magazine, okay? These are Texans, okay? Mm-hmm. He claimed that he had met some people online and transported some of them in his van from Dallas to the center in order to, quote, make some noise. The police found 7 suspects in black military fatigues wandering in a field 300 yards away, some of whom were covered in mud from trying to escape on foot. And so they also had some kit on them, okay? They had some, I know, that's the automatic reaction. You start laughing, right?
Oh my goodness.
Weapons.
The communist revolution, oh my gosh. The little Trotskys.
Here's your communist Texas revolutionaries right here. And they were going to do it today or whenever they did this, the day that they.
No, you go back to Dallas and you find Lee Harvey Oswald who could actually shoot a rifle and hit something. And it was a communist. But these people covered in mud, really? That's really, I mean, what's happened to the enemy? What's going on? Good grief. Look at this.
Okay, so now this is an FBI mugshot, and this is what grabbed my attention because I saw this man, and I didn't recognize his face, but I knew his name. And I thought, oh my God, are you kidding me? It's the same guy, because I had information on him from 2020. Okay. And so now I want everybody to notice, we're going to look at a couple things. You got a little mole here. You got a mole here. You can see the shadow, the way his hairline is. Mm-hmm. There's a crease right here. Okay. Mm-hmm. It's softer than here. This eye is a tiny bit lower than this eye. You've got a thinning out of the eyebrow right here. And then here is a hairline that's been receded here a little bit. The hairline comes back, it comes out, and it comes down. Okay, so there's your picture of him currently. I'll show you what I have from the guy from 2020. I put all this in a Word document, so I'm trying to scroll down. Okay. Here he is in 2020. His name is Benjamin Song, and this is a mugshot from the police department where he got arrested when we were having the 2020 riots here in Austin, and we had quite a healthy group of protesters.
This is 5 years. This is 5 years ago.
5 years ago. Okay.
5 years older. Yeah.
I've had this information on this guy all this time. And for some reason, and I don't remember why, um, I took screenshots of him and kept it, but I did. It's the same hairline, the same moles. Okay, it's him. Okay.
Hmm.
So go down some more. These are some other screenshots that I took of him.
Now
So,
that's him with an AR-15.
right. Okay. And evidently he is a Marine Reserve or something like this. He went through some training. And here, okay, this is 2012, May 2nd, 2012. Here,
2012. My gosh, that's 13 years ago.
okay, here's some other pictures from his Facebook page when he had a Facebook page. Here he is right here with the reserve stuff, his outfit there. Here he is a bit, kitted up.
So he was a Marine. He was in the USMC.
Yeah. Okay, so now here's some other screenshots of what I did was I took screenshots of a couple of his
Okay.
like pages, not his contacts, because actually he didn't have very many contacts.
Hmm.
But he did have a lot of likes, commando stuff, Democrat stuff, anarchy stuff, um, uh, and some other people that he was watching. This is
Oh,
Texas.
that's kind of creepy. He was watching people.
Yes, True Texas Project. This is Texas Freedom Force. These guys are MAGA types, okay?
Uh-huh.
Here's Hiram Gilberto, who's a independent journalist here in Austin that goes to all the protests. Here's another page of his likes. We've got the Red Handed Warrior Society, Solidarity stuff. Okay, this is what's significant right here is the Texas chapter of the Brown Berets. Does that sound familiar to you, Jeff? The Brown
Brown
Berets?
berets, yeah.
Okay, and so it kind of goes on and on. Evidently, at the time, I didn't download everything. Now, so he gets arrested at a protest, and
Hmm.
this is somebody who puts out we're going to do a fundraiser for his bail, right?
Right.
And it kind of gives a bio of him. Um, this was after the big story that we had out here about Garrett Foster, who got shot in the street by an off-duty sergeant, and that was a big fiasco here in town too. I've written about this on my blog. It was a big story in Austin, full of drama. And so then Ben was arrested along with the protest group. This is probably after the shooting. He was charged with two first degree felonies for exercising his Second Amendment right to carry. Okay, there's some gaps and holes in that little story there. And the police report is a complete lie. She ties him. So here she does. She ties him to the bugle boys, I guess, or whatever they call. They're the guys that are armed up in Texas that run around in Hawaiian shirts. So and then he was a part of the defending. He'd go out on the Black Lives Matter protests. And okay, he's a Marine Corps veteran, former college Republican chapter president, which is interesting, Libertarian Party, blah, 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 proud member of Black Lives Matter group, We Take the Streets. He's an activist who has practiced activism from Hong Kong to San Francisco and has spoken before the legislature in Washington, D.C. So,
From Hong Kong?
right.
Where was he born?
I don't know. When I was looking into him at the time, some of his contacts are from Hong Kong, and I have another file on one of his closest contacts from Hong Kong. Okay, so this is the guy that they're looking for now. So this is 5 years of radicalization. This is somebody who went through some form of Marine reserve training, uh, is involved with weapons, and has been heavily involved in the Austin protests, which were quite violent in
And
2020.
may actually be a Chinese national who got his U.S. citizenship from joining the Marines, pretended to be a Republican, pretended to be a libertarian, and but he's the whole time. Why was he pretending? Because he came from China.
Yeah,
He
and to
was infiltrating.
get information. So the last time that I saw a photograph of him was he was tabling, he was at a table at an event in Dallas, and it was either for Freedom Road Socialist Organization or Liberation Road or Code Pink. One of these people, and he's up there at a table. So this is not somebody that burned out, and this is somebody who kitted up the other day and went out with a bunch of people, and they were going to shoot some ICE members. Now, the guy that blabbed, he also said, I have been in a chat with these people for a long time. So, right? So what happened was the FBI put out this thing on Facebook. We've got a manhunt out for this guy because they got all the other ones. They got a manhunt out for this guy. So what do? I call the FBI last night and I say, I have some files on this person. And because I'm, nobody that they know calling in a tip, um, they dismiss you. They want to dismiss you right away. And so the only uh, ability that I had to get their attention was to say, look, if you want what I have, you're going to have to dig into the Wayback Machine and get that. Oh, well, okay. Now I'm, speaking some language that they know about, because I know about the Wayback Machine. If you want what I have, you're going to have to get it through the Wayback Machine.
Hmm.
You know, this guy probably went dark on social media. He wasn't really active on social media because I stopped looking at him after the 2020 protests because he moved to Dallas. And that's where a lot, some of the Red Guards and some of the Antifas and those people that were really, really active in Austin moved. They moved to Dallas, which I thought was really interesting.
Well, Dallas would be a major financial center of Texas, isn't it?
Yeah, and in Houston.
Houston, and of course, Austin's the capital. And Houston, of course, is where all the oil industry is,
Right,
right?
right. So they're out to get him, and I just thought that was really, really interesting. So that's the scoop. Y'all heard it here. You're seeing the photos. You're seeing the photos here. You're not going to see them anywhere.
Well, it's interesting because yeah, I mean that background is interesting because I think one of the things met some Republican activists, some black activists from Detroit who were conservatives, conservative Christians. The husband was a minister. I think the wife was also a minister. They were combating leftism in the black community in the Detroit area, and one of the things she said to me was all these people are these leftists are joining the Republican Party, masquerading as Republicans,
Mhm.
and it's a massive problem. And she told me some stories, and I had heard some of this before, and so what you're just presenting me with is familiar. I think that what we don't realize is that, Republicans don't think, oh, I'm going to go undercover and be a Democrat and mess with the Democratic Party. They don't think that way. We don't have anybody in America doing that. But the communists, people from China, if he's from China or from leftist groups, come in and join the Republican Party with the intention of subverting it and making it into, well, whatever they want to make it into, whatever they can do. They can disorient it. They can lead it down a blind alley. They can disrupt things inside of it. It really makes you think, what is going on in the political process?
Right, and they're definitely gathering intel, because
Yes,
there's
yes.
There's definitely Muslims out there who are active in the Republican Party and go out to a lot of events. And, a lot of it is so that you don't say anything, bad about the Muslims or Islam.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, there's a problem in a society. Uh, Politically, what unifies a society, what unifies it is, of course, language, shared history, cultural background, and of course,
Mhm.
certain civilizational ideas like Christianity, whether you're Catholic or Protestant or whatever, or at least a belief in freedom. But when you get to something like Islam, where the belief in the Constitution is not allowed because they believe in that Islam, they're part of a different nation and they follow their law is the law of the Islamic religion. You have a problem because they can't really swear an oath of allegiance to the U.S. Constitution or to the Constitution of Texas, as the case in your state. So what do you do? How do you regard such people? Because in a sense, they're always going to be aliens. They can never really be part of what you are. They can't really be Americans, can they?
Well, I think the Hispanic community has done a good job of doing that. I mean, I lived in San Diego and I've lived in Texas, and I think, the Hispanic community is one that has integrated well and assimilated.
But of course, they've got Christian background. Their
Hmm.
culture is not that different from ours. So the differences between people from uh, Hispanic countries, people from Latin America, and Americans is not that great. But if you're talking about somebody who's a Muslim or someone from a communist from China, you're talking about people that actually can never really belong to America because they belong to another political formation, right?
Right. Well, it must be very strange. It must be very, very strange for them. I mean, they're here and
Yeah.
but yeah, I
That's
don't.
the problem of, the key problem. It was Carl Schmitt who wrote the book, The Concept of the Political, and he said the main distinction in politics is the friend-enemy distinction. Just like in aesthetics, it's beauty and ugliness. It's friend and enemy. And the thing is that we don't think about that. We think we have a commercial culture, and we think, well, everybody can blend in, everybody can
Yeah.
fit. But everybody can't fit with everybody. That's just not realistic. You look at, I mean, it's weird. Yugoslavia was once, Southern Slavs. They all spoke the same language. They're racially the same. But their grandparents went, these grandparents of the Serbians went to the Orthodox Church, the Croatians, their grandparents went to the Catholic Church, the Bosnians went to the mosque. So their grandparents, I mean, under Yugoslavia, there was an atheist communist society. People weren't going to church, they were pretty much secular. But it suddenly, when Tito died, they all discovered their identity of where their parents went to worship and they started slaughtering each other.
Hmm.
In the 1990s, you had these terrible atrocities and wars between Serbia, the old Yugoslav state, and Croatia and Bosnia. And then, of course, you had Kosovo and you had the Albania and Kosovo situation. And of course, they're Muslims down there. So these people don't, when they embrace their traditional identity, they can't live together as one people. And of course, they're not. Yugoslavia doesn't exist anymore. It's Serbia, Croatia, and Bosnia.
Right.
So is America, I mean, are we balkanizing ourselves by admitting people into the country and giving citizenship to people who are basically belong to a different nation and are never going to, their primary allegiance is going to be to Islam or be to the communist Chinese, the Chinese Communist Party. There's Chinese who can come here and assimilate, but can the ideological communists from there assimilate? And is there, I mean, you might know more about this than me. Are there Muslims who can assimilate and can swear an oath of allegiance to the U.S. Constitution and still be Islam, still be Muslims?
I think that they can. Okay, so
Uh-huh.
maybe not doctrinally, because, it's just like the reason that we will never have a new international version of the Quran is because it is forbidden to change, because that would be changing the word of Allah, and man cannot change the word of Allah. And so it is forbidden.
To innovate, to liberalize.
Mhm.
So they can't say, "Oh, I'm a liberal Muslim." No, they have to be a non-Muslim.
Right. Right. I mean, they can be a part of a political party. They'll tell you, oh, I'm the ones that are conservative, that I've come across, the Muslims that are conservative, because I've been up to the Dallas area. I've been up to Plano. I've been in the mosques up there. I've talked to all of them up there, and many of them up there who are involved in the mosques that are up there. And the ones that are conservative are proud to be conservative. And they'll tell you, we voted for Trump. And, so they do have their political leanings, and they don't really talk about the conflicts. They really not in your presence. They're not going to talk about the conflicts in your presence.
Right.
You got to come out and ask them about it.
I've had a couple of Muslim readers in my history. One was a German speaking. Well, his parents were Bosnians who fled the trouble in the 1990s. So he was born in Germany. He's a German citizen, but he couldn't give up Islam, and he went through a radical phase when he was younger. But then he kind of came out of it, and I had a very long discussion with him about this, and I said, "Well, how can you be a Muslim and a German?" I just asked him frankly, and we had a very long discussion about it, and he came back to me a little bit afterwards, and he said, "Yeah, it is a problem. I realize
Hmm.
this. I have a German identity. I identify with Germany because he's born there and he grew up there, and he never grew up in a Muslim country, but his parents are Muslims. He's a Bosnian Muslim." And it is a curious thing how that would be worked out. And he realized that, of course, a lot of these people, they don't go to mosque. They're not
Right.
really religious, right? It's just like a lot of people say, "Oh, I'm Catholic or I'm Protestant." You see, well, they don't go to church. They don't do anything. Why do they think they are that, right?
Right.
So that's another issue. I mean, we're living in a world in which people identify very loosely with things that have to do with their parents, their grandparents, but there's something they've already shifted to being something else without realizing it.
Hmm.
And so how do there I hear this about a lot of Muslims in Europe that you get to the second generation and they're no longer really Muslim anymore. Is that
Yeah.
have you heard this before?
Oh, well, sure. I mean, when you watch London and you talk to people, um, they don't identify with those types of oppressions, especially the women. They don't want to wear hijabs or burqas or niqabs. They don't want to be less than a man. Especially if they happen to be one who is a high breadwinner.
Mm,
It's an intellectual thing, and they want their freedom, and they just really don't have anything to do with it. But they identify with their ethnicity, the regions that they're from, the regions that their family are from. And you can see them when they talk about it. I saw a guy the other day, his in an interview. He is an Iranian who was born and raised in Muslim. He's a media personality, a very, very popular media personality, and he was being interviewed about his history. He's from Iran. That's where he's from. Ethnically, that is who he is. But you can see his eyes darting off and thinking about the conflict between what the reality is in Iran and what the reality is in London. He doesn't want the Muslims taking over London, but yet it's a struggle with his culture. But what's winning out over him is the fact that he is not confused about what is right and what is wrong.
mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, the thing is that there's such this is part of modernization. You have this general look. Look at Europe. How many people go to church in Europe? I think church attendance is in the single digits in most European countries. In the United States is considered kind of unusual in that I think there's still 30 something percent of people go to church every Sunday or most Sundays. Um, that's not Europe. It's certainly not Russia. When people say Russia's Christian or Putin's a Christian, I looked in the last Easter before the pandemic, which I think was 2019. Church attendance in Russia was for all, on Easter Sunday, when a lot of people go to church, they don't go to church all year. It was 4%.
Wow.
And I think that the Russians have inflated the figures to try to claim they got something like 7%, but still, this is not. And people, I have these friends, some of who, well, America's not a Christian country anymore. It's just a fraud, and Russia's the Christian country. And I try to tell them, look, hardly any people go to church in Russia.
Yeah, what would make them think that?
Russian
Yeah.
propaganda.
Yeah, right. It's something that
I
they've heard. It's something that they've heard, So, like in Texas, when Trump was running for office and they were talking about the immigration issue, well, the people on the left, they would come out and they go, well, they're not all that bad. They are not all that bad. 20 million people coming over the border, but they're not all that bad. And I said, well, then maybe the house that's for sale across from you should take in all the Yemenis, you know,
Mhm.
and
If
and
they
you can
really
have
care,
those
if
guys
they
live.
care so much, yeah.
You can have those guys living across the street from you, and when they start sacrificing goats in the backyard, are you going to be okay with that?
Yeah.
Oh man, so yeah, it just kind of goes to show you how dangerous a narrative can be. But so what I'm thinking about and what I wanted to talk to you about was two things, the decline of intellect, the chaos that is happening around the world, um, on a scale I don't think we've ever seen before.
Yes,
And
absolutely.
and why, I mean, because it's bizarre. Not only is it on a global level with, professional militaries squaring off and semi-professional militaries squaring off and gaining ground, but contrast that with how our streets in the United States and in Europe are no longer safe. So my big question for you for the day is, why will World War III happen?
Well, World War III will happen because World War One and World War Two happened. Just as high as you can count before humanity loses as this part of history goes into a dark age, and we don't have the economic wherewithal for world wars. Um, I think there are cycles in history, but what people don't really realize what's happened is that around the year 1000 AD or so, and this is what uh, Henry Adams, who was a historian, a Harvard historian, sort of mapped out. He said, "Look, our civilization began around 1000 AD, and it's Christian based civilization." And he said that it has evolved into this materialistic civilization. We get to the schoolmen, and you get to nominalism. And something happened, and I think Richard Weaver was correct in his book, Ideas Have Consequences, which he wrote after World War II. And he said basically nominalism opened the door to materialism. And materialism inverts ontology. And what I mean by that is that everybody thinks that matter, the material world, is the ultimate reality. Well, there's no religion in that. You can't believe in God or the supernatural if the physical reality is primary. Because what goes with materialism is the idea that the mind and the spirit are epiphenomenal. They're just chemical reactions inside the brain.
Mm-hmm.
And when your body dies, your brain dies, lights out, there's nothing. And that creates, and Nietzsche wrote about this a lot back in the 19th century. He was, I think, Lou Salome said that Nietzsche was the most religious person she'd ever met. Now, Nietzsche was famously an atheist, but actually he said he could believe in a God, but it'd have to be a dancing God. Nietzsche was pained by what he called the death of God, and he has the parable of the madman. It's borrowed from Diogenes the cynic. Diogenes the cynic. It doesn't mean cynic, means it's Greek for dog. He lived like a dog. He slept out in the open. He wouldn't take a job. Well, he did work for food, but he said he couldn't be a regular employee because that was compromise the truth in his mind. So Diogenes the cynic, very famously, Alexander the Great came up to him when he was sunbathing and said, "Hi, I'm Alexander the Great. And if I wasn't Alexander the Great, I would be Diogenes." And Diogenes looked up at him and said, "Could you move? You're standing in my sun." But Diogenes, so Nietzsche created this Diogenes character. Diogenes was famous for walking around in broad daylight with a lantern, and people said, "What are you doing?" He says, "I'm looking for a wise man." So Nietzsche had this Diogenes figure in the parable of the madman walking around, and but Nietzsche's madman, Nietzsche's Diogenes, throws down his lantern at the feet of the people in the marketplace, and he looks at them and he points at them and he says, "God is dead and you are his murderers."
Oh.
And everybody's astonished. They're like, "What do you mean? What?" And then he realizes in the parable that they don't understand what they've done. And he says, like the light of a distant star that's already burned out. We're light years away. You don't realize this. You're still receiving the light, but that star is burned out. God is dead, and you're going to reap the whirlwind for this. And so Nietzsche's prophecies that he made in some of his books and in Ecce Homo, which is his sort of last mad offering because he was losing his mind when he wrote it. He was going insane, literally. He makes a bunch of prophecies saying that there would be wars, the likes of which the world had never seen before. Wars of ideas. Why wars of ideas? Well, we know that is ideological wars. What happened? World War I, World War II happened. And of course, you had communism, you had National Socialism, you had liberalism, you have these ideologies. Man is not primarily, you go back to the 16th century and it's religious warfare, 17th century religious warfare, wars between Catholics and Protestants. Now you have wars that are between political ideologies where human beings are creating ideologies that have a religious flavor so that man is seeking his salvation through politics. So you have Hitler. Hitler is the German Messiah, right? Well, he hates the Jews, but he's borrowing straight from Jewish, mythology, from Jewish ideas. The Jews have a Messiah. Now, Hitler's a Messiah, and Hitler's talking about the 1,000-year Reich, well, the 1,000-year reign of Christ on earth. And you've got these crazy people now, this crazy Chilean who wrote about Hitler being like the new Christ, right? Which is really crazy. So that, Hitler died for your sins in the bunker, that kind of craziness. But it becomes a religion. And same thing with communism. Communism takes a lot of the structures of Christianity, turns them around and puts them on their head and makes it materialist. So I saw this one communist, he had a program on one of these offbeat channels, and he had this big sign behind him, "Making heaven on earth," right? It's a millennial reign. I mean, this is religious. And I think there's been a number of people, it was Carl Jung, it was the Russian writer and friend of Solzhenitsyn who wrote the book on socialism, traces this back, that socialism is a religion. And I think that's we're seeing it come up. And I give this analogy. Christianity, which emerged out of the Roman Empire was pagan, right? So Christianity starts growing in the Roman Empire. There's still a tiny minority, but Christianity is in the cities. And it basically spreads in the cities, so that the urban areas are Christian. And what the word pagan means, ignorant country dweller. The pagans are outside the cities. and they basically took over because in the urban areas where the educated people were, where the administrative personnel of the Roman Empire were, they ended up taking over the Roman Empire through its administrative staff and ultimately the emperors. So you have the Emperor Theodosius basically declaring paganism and all unorthodox forms of Christianity to be forbidden. And
Right.
so the monks from the desert come and they basically destroy the pagan temples. And then, of course, it's within that same generation, the Roman legions, made up mostly of pagans, right? Ignorant country dwellers, they wouldn't defend the empire. The empire collapsed, at least the Western Roman Empire. So that's Rome. Well, think about this. We've got the blue state, red state phenomenon today, where what is the red? The red are they're the rednecks, right? The rednecks that live outside of the cities, they're the traditional Christian people. They're today's pagans, right? Ironically. And who's the blue? It's really not red state, blue state. It's red countryside, small town, blue, large urban areas.
Yeah.
And the blue is the new religion. It's where socialism is taken over, and it's taken over the state. It's look at most universities, the administrative staff of most of the government agencies is made up of people. So this new religion of socialism is coming through the cities just the way Christianity came through the cities. And they also look down on the redneck the way the Christians look down on the pagans, the ignorant country dwellers. I mean, we're seeing the same thing. And I had the epiphany when I heard a U.S. senator say, well, we can't get people to join the army because we've got homosexuals and people transitioning in the army. And of course, most of the people who want to join the army are Christians, and they don't want to join an army that has that, right?
Right.
So there you've got the legions. The people won't join the legions anymore. The pagans won't join them. And they're your best fighters, right? Because people who live in a city, they're sedentary, they're not in shape. People who work on a farm, they're strong and they're hardy. So it's very interesting to see this parallel. I think we're going through a transition, it might not fully transition because socialism is, in my opinion, is evil. It's a very misguided idea. It's a alienated idea with an inverted ontology, and it has this materialist ontology. Now, there's people trying to bring religion into it, just the same way that people are trying to make National Socialism a religion, which was, by the way, one of the things Hitler wanted to do. But you're seeing people like Alexander Dugin, who was recruited by the KGB at the end of the Soviet period. They're trying to create, they realized that communism, Marxism, Leninism, in some sense, was not satisfying. So they're trying to say, well, then we've got to find some crazy mystic who can inject religion into socialism to make it succeed. And I think that's what Dugin's been doing and the people around him. And I think that's what we're seeing unfolding now is this struggle both with the transformation of what was communism and growing. And you have these communist powers like China. And of course, I think Russia's still run by a communist administrative staff. And these domestic alienated people, it was Eric Voegelin, the American German slash Austrian philosopher, political philosopher, who said that all of this communism, Nazism, totalitarianism comes from alienated people, alienated human beings. And they are like those faces you put up,
Yeah.
those young people.
Yeah.
Look at those poor young people, and
Yeah.
you can almost see the despair and the alienation in their faces in those pictures, can't you?
You can. And when you're on the streets with them, because the first time I came face to face with a crowd of Antifa was in 2017. And it's beyond being high on drugs. I mean, they really have no soul. And and they can be pretty malleable and scary at the same time. So it's a different level.
Yeah, there's we've had different people talk about the cluster B personalities, the hysteric, the narcissist, the borderline, the psychopath,
Yeah.
or the antisocial personality. Now they don't want to put a negative connotation to it, but These are basically a lot of them are identity disorders, and they're mood disorders where the person is there's something broken in the person themselves. And often it's abuse as children, it's neglect. But I think what I observed in college among Marxists when I was in graduate school was they were terrified by their own materialism. Because as Nietzsche said, God is dead, and now what? You believe that when you die. I remember this Marxist, he was drinking, and he said to me, he said, like it was this tragedy. He said, "There's so many starving people in the world. It's all full of grief." And then his next statement was, "In 100 years, no one will remember me." And I thought, that is a strange kind of Christ complex that he wants to save the world, but he's worried about his own ego and the greater pantheon of reality where he has to be remembered.
Yeah, this is how I think Carl Jung, is it pronounced Jung or Yoon?
Jung,
Jung,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah, Carl Jung.
talked about self self sabotage.
Yes.
The reason, and he talked about how, and I was thinking about this before I started reading some of his stuff this week, was that, I think that the climate of war, the status of war, the environment of war is more common than the environment of peace. And Carl talked about that kind of thing where, we are warring with ourselves. We war with our family. We war with our communities. And he was able to describe it in such a way. And this is how World War III will happen. We will never stop wars. There will never be peace amongst our species, um, because we are in a constant state of war in our intellect, in our psyche.
Wars is quite natural to human beings,
Yes.
and it goes back a long time. The idea, the people, this utopianism, people have this notion that the world is going to be they can make the world into a perfect place where everybody's prosperous and everybody's equal and there's no conflict. That's all nonsense. You can't do it. You try to do it, you'll kill more people and cause more war and more poverty than ever. And exhibit A is communism.
Mao. Yeah, right.
Mao. Yeah, we're going to make the perfect society. Right. You just starved, 80 million Chinese to death and
Hmm.
put another 20 million in the Lao guy and worked them to death or
Right.
re-educated them and brainwashed them so that they were just, mental or emotional cripples. It's terrible. If somebody comes up to you and says, "I'm going to save you," run, right? I don't need saving. Life is about the trials and the personal struggles that we all have to go through. That's supposed to be there. That's part of being human. The idea that you're going to eliminate that, I mean, what are we going to be? We're going to all become giant and fat and just sit around and watch TV all day and be happy and stuff ourselves with junk food because that's really pleasurable and never have anything go wrong. I mean, that's ridiculous. I think, and of course, Jung was. I think there's a book by him that I highly recommend, and it's The Undiscovered Self. And in that book, it's one of his last books. It's a pretty quick read. And he basically says what's gone wrong. He said that we're going insane as a society, as civilization. And if you read it really carefully, he's really in a very nice way. He's saying modern man is going crazy. And why is he going crazy? Because the religions that we had, the beliefs that we had, were structures within which we could reach the meaning of our souls. We could communicate. We could reach God. Um, but you take that away, and then what you have political ideologies. Well, political ideologies aren't about reflecting about yourself or reaching God. Political ideologies are about you becoming God
Hmm.
and using politics and political power to make everything good. And therefore, the bad people, all the people that disagree with you, have to be eliminated or put down or put under your heel. I mean, and Jung said this is insane. And he talked about shadow projection. That is, we
Right.
all have a dark side. And what happens with these political ideologies is you're not, in religion, you have to confess your sins, you have to think about your sins and what you've done that's wrong. But in with these political ideologies, no, you think about, oh, those evil Democrats or those evil Republicans or those bad people over there. It's all they've caused all the problem. If we can just eliminate the Jews, right? Then everything will be right. You can see Hitler there. We're just going to eradicate the Jews from Europe and we'll have paradise. Or the communists will eliminate the bourgeoisie and we'll have paradise. If you just kill off these certain groups of people, and of course, but the killing never stops because it turns out that when you're projecting your shadow and you're possessed by your dark side, the killing is really what is getting you off.
And your ego.
Yes, and it's ego expansion, right? And of course, this is the thing about that, if you have religion, if you have a deeper belief, you are realizing, I'm going to die, and it's not a bad thing, it's natural, and I'm going to be reunited with God. I'm going to go over that passage into the next world, because guess what? The material world is an illusion. It's a construction. The material world is, one a physicist who had an epiphany. God spoke to him when he did these equations. Told me, he said that reality is made, the physical reality is made by God from moment to moment, and we dwell in it. But when we die, we pass over to Him. And I think it was the philosopher Bernardo Kastrup, he's worth looking into. He says that we're living, when you die, you go to be with God, and then you're looking at everything is right side up. But out in our world, we're living outside of God, it's upside down or
Mm-hmm.
inside out, right?
Mm-hmm.
So everything we see is that inside outness. And so in a way, if you believe that the material world is all there is, whoever dies with the most toys wins, remember that one?
Yeah.
That is not going to get you anywhere because that nihilism comes in. Oh, I'm going to die. Oh, it's all for nothing. Oh, it's a sick joke. And that colors the mentality of these alienated revolutionaries. And so in their frustration, in their pain, because it's real pain to believe this, what do? To The only way to feel better is to be God and to seek this ultimate power that somehow if they get enough of this power, they won't suffer this final end. They'll have some kind of immortality. And so how do they get this immortality? Well, the way Stalin, Mao, and Hitler did it, by the immortality of killing an enormous number of people.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, we just might see that again in our lifetime.
I'm afraid we might,
And we might see it sooner than later. So tell us what is on your radar in regards to that. How is it ramping up? I know the Houthis, or what, the Chinese just shot a laser off in the Red Sea, and they've been sending air defense capacities into Iran. How is it?
Yes.
What have you heard recently? How's it ramping up? When do you think it's going to pop off?
Well, the Russians are preparing for a world war. They're secretly raising troops. They build enormous infrastructure on the NATO border and in Kaliningrad, in Belarus, massive underground fallout shelters and bunkers. It's very frightening, and they've got a 200 force of 200 SS-27s. Those are road mobile ICBMs. It looks to me like they've moved about 100 of them, or have created facilities at least to move 100 of them into Belarus and Kaliningrad. Why would they do that? Because the SS-27 has the fastest boost phase of any ICBM, and if they fire at low trajectory
Mhm.
into Western Europe, they can strike France's nuclear deterrent, Britain's nuclear deterrent, which are in submarines in ports, and destroy that nuclear deterrent. And they can destroy airfields full of planes with these nukes. They can destroy NATO headquarters, decapitate countries. They can create mayhem and then invade Western Europe. That's a possibility. Or they're threatening that, and there seemed to be some preparation to invade the Baltic states. And you're seeing
Mhm.
alarm in Europe, especially in the Baltic states. You've had Poland and Lithuania pull their troops back further from the border because they don't want to be caught by surprise because of the Russian buildup and Belarusian buildup on the other side. And of course, Europe is taking alarm. Ukraine, of course, is holding the line, and Europe has not used the 3.5 years of this Ukraine war to do what it should have done to build the arms plants, to build itself up. Because if Russia were to collapse Ukraine, Europe would not, there's not another 700,000 men sitting in Poland and Romania waiting to stop the Russian army. The Russian army would hit Europe hard. And the fact that the Russians are raising more troops, and see, the Russians can't use nuclear weapons in Ukraine because Putin says the Ukrainians are really Russians.
Right.
You can't use nukes against your own people. But once they cross into NATO, yeah, they can use the nukes.
Well, he's dropped an Oreshnik on them, and he's used chemical weapons on them. And
Yes.
he's committed, tremendous environmental disasters on them. He's raped and pillaged their children, stolen their children, looted everything he could, doing everything to humiliate the Ukrainian people by bombing them every night.
He's trying to take away their electricity. He's trying to destroy their homes. He's trying to make it so that they'll leave the country,
Right.
and basically leave it to him. Because if enough of the population leaves the country, there won't be anybody to support the war there. And so
He's
yeah.
basically got one card, right? And the one card is, because the one card is bombing the citizens. So do you think that all this buildup in Belarus, which we just really scratched the surface on, when it
Mhm.
comes to the amount of stuff that's there, it's not like they can probably remove it, back and hit Ukraine with it. Am I
Well,
right?
they could once they get the troops in Belarus that they need, they could go south. But their problem is the Pripet Marsh is this big marsh, the biggest one in Europe, that extends from almost the Polish border all the way almost to Kiev.
To
And
Chernobyl, right? The
and
Chernobyl area?
yeah, Chernobyl is on the west side of that air. I mean, sorry, east side of that marsh. And the problem is it's very hard to advance
Yeah.
troops through there because
Yeah.
of the bottlenecks. It's easier for the Ukrainians to stop an invasion coming that way. They could try it again. There may be a trick to getting through. Remember, Hannibal went over the Alps. The Germans sent their tanks to the Ardennes in 1940. So there might be a trick, but it looks to me like they're really putting pressure on NATO, and it
Yeah.
may be next year. They're having an exercise in September called Zapad 2025, and there could be war could begin with that exercise, or it could start next year. The problem is it's a race against time, and then the other thing, it brings China into it and Iran, is the Chinese Foreign Minister, Mr. Yang, went to Europe last week.
Hmm.
And he basically told the German Foreign Minister and some EU officials, he said, look, China will not stand for Russia losing this war.
Hmm.
We absolutely won't stand for it. Now, that's China.
Right.
That's the biggest, that's a big country with massive population, massive industrial capacity, and a lot of economic muscle. And this is what they're saying. And that's scary. So that means Russia's got China and North Korea behind it. And, Trump has not been as behind Ukraine as he should be. And Europe is weak in armaments. I mean, North Korea, for example, has given more ammunition to Russia than the United States has given ammunition to Ukraine. Little tiny North Korea can produce more ammunition for that war than we can. Now, that's kind of sad. The Russians just built a munitions plant in Venezuela that probably has more capacity to build basic ammunition than everything in Texas, right? All the plants in Texas that the US has. So and this is one plant the Russians built in Venezuela. And Venezuela is really a communist bloc country, like
Right.
Cuba, like Nicaragua. I think Brazil is becoming one. Look, they're taking over Latin America. General Laura Richardson of Southern Command, I don't know if she's still in that job, but 4 years ago, she said, look, she said the Russians and Chinese are moving into Latin America and they're taking over,
Mm-hmm.
really not doing anything. And so I think you see the protests in Mexico City where where this I guess you'd say either Mexican nationalists or what leftist mobs assailing foreigners. What's going on there? I think Mexico City is the biggest city in the world in terms of population. So you've got the Chinese just belt and roading Africa and South America. They're building the biggest port in South America. They're working on it in Peru. Why? Because they're colonizing Peru. They're colonizing Brazil. They operate their own section of the port that services Sao Paulo, the business center of Brazil. And they don't, customs doesn't stop them from doing what they want. I've talked to people in Sao Paulo. The Chinese just run roughshod over the Brazilians. There was a scandal. They were controlling Brazil's Supreme Court. Lula da Silva's a communist. He's a former friend of well, he's a friend of Castro. Castro's dead now, the communist dictator. I mean, the Sao Paulo Forum is just a communist front for putting leftists in power in all the South American countries. Then you go to Africa and you see, I mean, Putin bragged the other day, the Russian Empire will extend across Africa, and you've got the Chinese all over Africa, and Chinese troops in the form of construction workers. Look, the Chinese are not into charity. They don't give things to people. Why are they building roads and electric stations and infrastructure throughout Africa? They're not building it for the Africans.
Right. They mean to dominate the land. Right.
Right. Exactly.
Right. So yeah, things are really changing and it is going to affect us. Trump has a lot to deal with. And I guess we can see what he is focusing on. Do you have any faith at all in him that he's going to really truly understand Putin enough to take a strong stance against him and do what needs to be done to stop Putin's aggression? And um, so that'll be the first question. I have another one for you after that.
I don't know. Trump is very erratic. You can't tell what he's going to do. If the Russians have anything compromising on him, and I suspect they do, they don't dare use it because it could really backfire on them, and I suspect it has now backfired on them. He's more like a Mr. Magoo. He doesn't see very well. He's not very perceptive. But he's got this instinct. Like Magoo is blind, but he's got this stick, and he just never, the Mr. Magoo cartoon. He never falls in that basement. He never goes over the cliff. He never gets run over. He somehow makes it through. And Trump is kind of like this. He's got this uncanny instinct. And instinct may be better in terms of action in many cases than people who outthink themselves with their minds. So it may be that he'll work it out. He's got very bad people around him. I'll say that. If it's up to them, if something were to happen to him, I have no faith in Mr. Vance and the
Yeah, I
people
think
around
I,
him.
I call it a scenario of accidents and inspirations because I sure don't think that Trump is handling some kind of, chess game and he's thinking 6 or 7 steps. He's too reactionary and he's transparent. And I like his transparency. I think it shows that there's some, honesty and genuineness in there. But the way he reacts and the things that he says, it's taken him a while to come around. And he said at one point, I don't know what happened to him, talking about Putin. I don't know when he went bad or what happened to him. And some people say that that was at the point when Putin was, kind of kicked to the curb, by the West and not included in the way that he wanted to be included. So he
Mhm.
turned on everybody. Do you think that's true?
No, of course not. No, Putin. Look, I followed Putin's career very carefully. And it was in the year 2001, June 22nd, Putin made a speech, and it was the 60th anniversary of the Hitler's invasion of the Soviet Union.
Mm.
And basically, Putin's speech said that NATO is an alliance exactly like Hitler's, fascist movement, and that it's the same danger that threatened the Soviet Union is threatening Russia today, and it's NATO. In this speech, people can go and look it up. It was on the occasion of the 22nd of June, 2001. And because why? Because I wrote a long essay about it at the time, which was published, and but nobody noticed. there were a few analysts that expressed concern. And then after the Beslan massacre, I think that was 2002 or 3, Putin gave another speech where he clearly, without naming the United States, blamed the United States for the massacre.
Mm.
It alarmed certain people. But so from the very beginning, Putin had this view that the West was their enemy, America was an enemy. It's not something that suddenly appeared. But see, everybody wanted to believe that Russia had changed, that Russia was a new kind of system. Look, Putin's been the ruler of Russia since Boris Yeltsin stepped down at the end of 1999. That's a long time. That's 25 years of being in power. Right? That's 25 years of being in power. Who is in power 25 years? Dictators.
Dictators.
Dictators. And Boris Yeltsin was not a Democrat. He was a candidate Politburo member of the Soviet Politburo. He becomes a Democrat? Do we really believe that? I don't believe it. And in fact, anyone can go to the Clinton Library and read the transcripts of Bill Clinton's conversations with Boris Yeltsin. And the last conversation he had with Boris Yeltsin in December in Istanbul, face to face in December of, this was the last face to face conversation because he actually talked to him the night he resigned. But the last face to face conversation that Boris Yeltsin had with Bill Clinton, Boris Yeltsin starts out accusing Bill Clinton of going for ballistic missile defenses, ABMs, Star Wars type stuff. And Clinton starts defending himself. Well, I'm giving the Republicans this and that, but I'm really stopping it by what I'm doing. So finally, after they argue about this, and it's as if, Boris Yeltsin is making these demands. You can't let America arm, right? As if it's still the Soviet Union that he's talking about. And so then Boris Yeltsin says, Bill, I still believe in you. But you have to do one thing. You have to give Europe to Russia. And it's
Mm.
right there in black and white. And they have this big discussion where Clinton's backing away going, but wait a minute, Europe doesn't want me to give them to you. How can I do this? I can't do this. And Boris Yeltsin is lecturing Bill Clinton, saying, look, I'm sitting in Moscow, and Moscow's a European city. Russia should have Europe. You go and defend these other countries, and we'll take care of Europe. I mean, it's right there in black and white. This dialogue was classified until 2018. You can go to the Clinton Library, you can go online, you can download it, and you can read it yourself. And it's astonishing. It isn't just Putin that wants Europe, or Medvedev speaking for Putin saying we're going to own everything from Lisbon to Vladivostok. This was what Gorbachev said. The one common European home. Remember that? That was Gorbachev. That was in his book Perestroika, and his book Glasnost. He talked about this. He wrote about it. So did Boris Yeltsin. Except Boris Yeltsin was more ambitious. He said from Vladivostok to Vancouver, to wrap all the way, they'd have Canada as well as Western Europe, right? Um, and that is their dream. The Russians want Alaska back. You've seen the signs in Siberia saying Alaska's ours. They're saying, oh, well, we didn't sell it. We just loaned it to you. You have to give it back. This kind of imperialism just won't stop. And the Chinese are on board with it. The Chinese and Russians are allied. All these Marxists and socialists through Africa and, well, they call it the global South, right? And Latin America, they're all on board with this.
Yeah,
From,
they've
yeah,
played the long game for a really long time, and I
yep.
think they're restless for war, and I think they're ready to make it happen, and I think it's going to be spectacular. So, am I right in thinking that with the buildup in Belarus, that um, they're gonna when they're that's what they're going to activate? And, the world may think that they're losing in Ukraine or may know that they're losing in Ukraine. It looks pretty bad for them in Ukraine.
Yes, it
But
does.
you know the numbers of what they have in Belarus. Is it going to be shock and awe from them?
They're going to mobilize more, and the Chinese are going to get involved. What Mr. Yang said when he went to Europe last week, the Chinese foreign minister, he basically said, we need Russia to be victorious in Europe because that will allow us to make the moves we want in the Pacific,
Mm-hmm.
right? So China realizes that if Russia gets stuck in Ukraine, it's not going to be able to threaten Japan and Taiwan and the United States and all the countries in Asia and the Pacific. China will be hemmed in. China needs Russia. Together they have the strength. This is what the defector, GRU defector, Colonel Stanislav Lunev told me. He said Russia by itself can't win. China by itself can't win. He said it's a combination of Russian nuclear missile power and Chinese manpower that will enable them to win World War III. And I asked him, I said, you think they can win World War III? He said, absolutely, I do.
Mhm.
He said that to me in 1998 when I first met him. And of course, he passed away in 2020, but he always maintained, I'd call him up when there was when Putin got elected back to president after he was prime minister. What was it, 2012? Um, there were riots in Moscow and they were arresting all kinds of people. I said, is Putin in trouble? And he told me, he said, no, he's not in trouble. He's perfectly fine. And I think that Colonel Lunev would say he's still fine, that Putin's still in a strong position domestically, that he hasn't been undermined. The economy is having difficulties in Russia, but look, they Russian people have been told in no uncertain terms you're going to be making sacrifices, and I think that they're going to realize before the year is done that they're headed for that. I think a lot of people do realize it. And China, the same thing. We see the Chinese economy unraveling. But you have to ask the question, why is the Chinese economy unraveling? Because they started to mobilize their economy for war very gradually to move it from producing things for Walmart to actually producing more military goods. And I think that this is a financial problem for the Chinese because of their malinvestment and because of their heavy indebtedness. They've got a worse indebtedness problem than we do. But that doesn't matter because they can always starve their people. They can always do a Chairman Mao routine and
Yeah.
say, you're Chinese, you have to make sacrifices, and this is your tradition. Same thing with the Russians. All right, you're Russians, you're tough. You're tougher than other people. You can do this. And whereas in the West, we don't dare cut corn, it's butter, not guns. And we've become so addicted to the butter that people are not able to make the sacrifices. This is the problem. Look at how hard it was to get Europe to agree to a 5% increase, which doesn't happen until 2035. Well, the Russians can mobilize, 5 million men in the next 2 years,
Why
and
would
Europe can mobilize nothing.
why would China, I saw the picture, Kaja Kalay, I think that's how you say her last name, Kaja, former Prime Minister of Estonia, and now she is in the European Commission with Ursula and everyone else.
Van der
Right?
Leyen, yeah, uh-huh.
It was interesting seeing her and the Chinese representative kind of square off. Why would China tell us what they're going to do?
Well, because there's been a change in China. I think Xi Jinping isn't really in charge anymore. And it's a very simple explanation why. Xi Jinping is the president of China officially, but I think he's lost power, and I think there's a troika ruling behind him, led by a general, a PLA general named General Zhang. And the reason I think that is because Xi Jinping was trying to reform the military. He put a bunch of his cronies in the strategic rocket forces, the Air Force, and the Navy. But now those cronies have been removed, and it's General Zhang that's done it. And so I think Xi Jinping probably, well, he's over 70 and his health isn't very good. I just don't think he could cope. But I think that he basically bungled. And a lot of people watching China were saying, well, Zhang can't decide between war and peace. You know, he's not decisive. He seemed a bit ambiguous and ambivalent on all kinds of things. He would kind of support Russia, but he didn't want to antagonize the United States. He would do something to antagonize Australia, and he would get bit, and then he would run back the other way. I mean, Xi was trying to please everybody, and it wasn't working. I don't think Xi was particularly bright. He wasn't that brilliant. He was maybe charismatic, and I think what's happened is a much more brilliant intriguer and probably better strategist, General Zhang, has prevailed. And I think that this visit of the Chinese foreign minister to Europe was Zhang's doing, because you see, the soldier's way is to directly confront at one point and to lay down the law and to say, we our production in China is many times yours. You can't even outproduce Russia. Russia outproduces Europe several times over in arms and ammunition. How can you, even though the Russians, they die at a 6 or 7 to 1 ratio? I mean, the Russians can up this to a 10 or a 12 to 1 ratio, and in that case, Russia wins. Russia just wins either the attrition, the numbers are just too great. And then
Hmm.
you throw North Korea and China into the mix.
Hmm.
And then what can Europe do?
Hmm.
And the thing is that Trump has made Europe feel very insecure because he said, well, maybe Article 2, of course, in the more recent NATO meetings, he's affirmed Article 5. I'm sorry, Article 5. But people, Trump is so erratic. Can we rely on him? Some people say yes, some people really hate him and say no. And so this is a point where being strongly for Russia really adds to Russia's potential momentum and to the morale of Russia and can open the door for China. So I think Zhang is a much better strategist than Xi Jinping. And I think that we're going to see a much stronger, more bellicose China starting to emerge.
Oh, wow, that's scary. So, yeah, I'd heard those reports that she was on the way out. So we don't know what's going to happen. Putin's not a young man either.
No.
So,
But I think he's in much better health than Xi.
I,
And I think that the structures around Putin are in a way more stably fixed on this course that Putin has taken. I don't think Putin took this course alone. This is why he got the Federation Council to vote on the war when he started in 2022 with the special military operation, as they euphemistically call it, and he got his whole cabinet behind it, so that there were no dissenting voices. He made it a consensus that everyone agreed. So they're all sort of placed in the same political position, and they're all associated with this if it's a failure. So it can't be a failure. I mean, Putin made it so that it's all on them. And it was the way you look at the publicity surrounding the days before the invasion in February 2022. You maybe watched all that drama unfold on Russian TV. It was really something to watch. Putin's rambling speech, but the vote in the Federation Council and his browbeating his lackey subordinates. It was something.
yeah, I remember that.
Yeah. So it's and I think if whether it's someone like Patrushev that follows him, who is it that will be the next? They have someone in mind if something should happen to him,
Mm.
and I don't think he's going to be a liberal. I don't think so. I think that this course, they're not going back to perestroika or glasnost because that didn't really work the way they wanted it to work. I think that was originally conceived. I think I agree with Yevgeny Albats and people like Anatoly Golitsyn, the KGB defector that the KGB managed, and I think Anna Politkovskaya thought this too, that the KGB managed perestroika and managed the glasnost. I think that Gorbachev was a protege of Andropov, and Andropov had been the longtime head of the KGB, and it was a strategy for disarming the West. And I think they did disarm the West because after 1992, we stopped building nuclear weapons. And although the United States kept 10 divisions instead of 27 or 28 in its military, Western Europe largely disarmed. The Germans went down to nothing. And Germany was the biggest economic power in Europe. And the French army is in terrible shape. So are all the militaries in Europe. They're
It,
not ready, right? But the Russians are in a position to ramp up much faster, and nobody really took notice of that.
right.
Nobody took notice.
Yeah, well, Europe has its pants on fire right now, and it's going to be interesting to watch. I mean, Friedrich Merz, the new Chancellor of Germany, is interesting to watch, and I like him better than I liked Olaf Scholz. At least he seems to be more committed to things, but we'll find out if it's just a harsher tone of voice and strong words, or you know
Well, Mertz is. I think he's serious. I think
good.
Mertz is serious, and of course they're starting to produce the missiles,
Yeah.
and I think the UK is getting serious. Although I'm not a fan of Keir Starmer. They're getting serious. I think the French are getting serious. I see there's a difference in tone in Macron. And of course, Finland, Sweden, the Scandinavian, the Nordic countries are getting serious. So that's good. Hungary and Slovakia, however, seem to be tilting towards Russia.
Right.
That's not good, and Spain is reluctant to fulfill its commitments. But I think that's going to be worked out because I think the condition people are going to see more and more because Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, and the other communist bloc countries, Cuba, Nicaragua, what you're going to see is more intensified uh, movement towards a large global war,
Hmm.
more preparations, more harsh rhetoric. And of course, as that builds, people will take notice. People will become alarmed. And this will create more unity in the West. I
Hmm.
think we're seeing some healthy signs in Europe about an emerging will. I hope we are.
Yeah.
In the United States, the problem is we are divided here. But if the communists, you follow these activists and these people, but as the crisis intensifies, people will rally around the flag if we've got the right leaders and we listen to the right people, and that's what we have to do as citizens.
Well, and I was going to ask you for some final thoughts, and that sounds like you just gave it to us, you know, uniting and rallying around, uniting around the flag. I mean, that's what I see in the Hispanic community out here. There's a lot of Christians and Catholics, and we still are a Christian nation, or we're supposed to be. So,
Well, it may be not as large a percentage as it was, but it's still a large number of people, and I think that larger even than that is this belief in freedom in the Constitution. We have a system of checks and balances.
mhm,
And that is very important. These people from the Dark Enlightenment, people like Curtis Yarvin who want a monarchy, who think that the Enlightenment, the Constitution is part of is Enlightenment ideas, say those things are wrong. No, they're not wrong. America became the strongest country in the world because of its Constitution and because of how it functioned. And the problem is we have to hold our representatives and our president's feet to the fire, and we have to make Congress has to start taking more responsibility because it's given up too much responsibility. And we need to sweep away these. We have to go back to faith. We have to go away from nihilism. We have to believe again that life has a purpose. We have to rediscover meaning, and it's all around us to be discovered. But it's not discovered in whoever dies with the most toys wins. That's not it.
yeah. So, yeah, it's true. I think the older that people get, the more they understand that faith is important, you know. And I
Yeah.
think in times of chaos like we're having right now, it's really important to maintaining a calm state of mind and moving forward and progressing as a person, and growing in knowledge. And there's not a day that I don't go out into the areas where I live and I see people who are just so incredibly checked out of the world around them. And even, the local world around them, much less the global world around them. And they are incredibly stupid and they don't have anything happening, in their life. So, war is not going to be good for the United States. And do you have any kind of projection in that regard? If we're not attacked here, okay, um, are we just going to be like we were with Iraq or whatever? Well, that's over there and it doesn't matter. How I just don't see it not affecting us this time, especially if it's World War III. What's that going to be like for us if you could opine on that?
Yeah, look, we've got a lot of illusions in this country about happily ever afters and economic prosperity going on and on. We are going to face, first of all, we've got this enormous debt. And here we're facing a potential war, and we have to rearm.
Hmm.
We have to come up with the money. And this is a real problem. This is part of the struggle within the government. And we have to decide what really matters. And the thing is our security. Look, I had dinner with General Van Herk, former commander of NORAD, and what he told me was very frightening of the power of the Russians to strike North America
Hmm.
and the power of the Chinese in a few years to do the same kind of strikes that Russia can do. We have to modernize our defenses, and that's going to be very expensive. I mean, it cost an enormous amount of money when we built our initial deterrent, nuclear deterrent, largely in the 1960s. And we have to come up with that same kind of figure. I mean, it was, I forget what the figure is. In modern money, it's $7 trillion to build that. In today's money, it's greatly inflated money. Now, where are we going to come up with that money to defend? That's what we need to defend ourselves today.
Yeah, and how is the West Coast going to defend itself against a cobalt submarine off the coast that fires a weapon that can wipe out Los Angeles and San Diego and then rot its way into Nevada, New Mexico, and Idaho?
Well, that's not the kind of war that the Russians and Chinese are preparing for. Uh, and this is Colonel Stanislav Lunev, who I knew. He saw the war plans of Russia and China as they were evolving before his defection in '92. At the end of the Cold War, the Russians and Chinese got together and they were making a plan to assault North America. And Mr. Wang of Luda Media has told me from his sources in China, this is the plan. They want to fight World War III on American soil in North America. They don't want to fight it in the Pacific. So this idea that Taiwan, it's all about Taiwan, it's nonsense. They'll just blockade Taiwan and they'll go straight for the United States. And people say, "Oh, that's impossible. Our Navy will stop them." Well, you see, you got to remember that they're not looking at a conventional war because they won't win one. You see Russia and Ukraine in a conventional war, they're pathetic. They're no good at it. The
Hmm.
Chinese won't be any good at it either. They need a nuclear world war. It's what
Hmm.
Lunin said that was their whole plan. And there you go back to the great Soviet strategist Vidi Sokolovsky, who was the editor of the book Soviet Military Strategy. And that is your winning weapon is your nuclear rocket weapon. Now, what does that mean? You're not bombing cities, really. You can do that, but you are going after the enemy's nuclear weapons, the enemy's headquarters, the enemy's military infrastructure, and then you're invading. And you see, you don't want to create a lot of fallout. You create fallout where you have to, where there's bunkers you have to, dig out of the ground. But with air bursting hydrogen bombs, there's no real fallout. There's very, very little. It's not significant. It's, in fact, we suffered more fallout just living and breathing in the 1960s. All the fallout from those above ground atomic tests in the 50s, we were exposed to more fallout then than we would be in a full blown hydrogen war that happens now. And that's just a fact. You have to study the details of the fallout studies, which very few people have bothered to do. And the Russians and the Chinese fully know this. And they know there's nothing wrong with using them. So they will go after us at some point, and it's nuclear Pearl Harbor. It's attacking ships at sea and in port with nuclear missiles and torpedoes, clearing the seas of everything but our submarines, and getting through with troops bringing, look at, there's a lot of Chinese moved into Mexico, into Central America. There's tens of thousands of Chinese. Many of these are dual purpose. These are People's Liberation Army
Hmm.
reservists, and they've moved weapons into Mexico. Look at Scott Gulbranson's book, The Silent Invasion. Scott Gulbranson was a Las Vegas journalist who went down to Mexico and to look to see what was happening with communism down there. And he found that the Russians, Chinese, and Cubans were operating down there, that the Chinese were bringing and stockpiling weapons in Mexico, and they were smuggling some of those weapons across the U.S. border. Now, this was, I think that book came out in 2001 or 2002, but it's a very important book, and he's not the only one to talk about this. There's some Mexican journalists. There's a Mexican YouTuber that goes and shows the Mexican contractors built the highway from Ensenada, where the Chinese control the port, up to Tijuana, up to San Diego. And the Mexican contractors that built this highway told them, well, the Chinese paid for it. And they said, this is our highway for invading the United States. No joke, right? So what the war is going to be is that the Chinese and Russians have this crazy idea of using nuclear weapons to get military supremacy so that their armies and navies can come through. They can land in Alaska and the U.S. West Coast, and that they could then wear us down in a long war of attrition. And that if they can destroy our nukes enough, if they can get that for, I think they'll fall on their face if they try this. but we don't know what they will do. But it's a very scary thing that a lot of people don't want to even talk about. But from what I'm seeing, and I wrote the book, The Origins of the Fourth World War, 35 plus years ago, and it wasn't published till the 1990s. But in that book, I basically predicted this is where things would end up. That China and Russia would be united, the West would be largely disarmed and trying to come back from behind, and that's when they would strike. And that's what I say in that book, and this is how it's played out. Now it wasn't rocket science, it wasn't some magic that I figured that out. It was very simple logic. I knew the Russian strategy from reading the defector literature that they were planning a fake liberalization of the communist bloc and that they were doing it to get us to disarm. And I knew that we would disarm, and we did. And here we are with them believing that they have an advantage and pressing home that advantage. But of course, they're socialists, so they bungle rather badly. So what is their real advantage? Do their nukes work? Is their system falling apart? Is China going to be able to manage a war? We don't know.
We don't know.
Yeah.
Well, and with that, I think we'll close out. Thank you for coming on to the show. We're going to put some links in the description. I'm going to go through all of those books and things that you talked about, and I'm going to put the links in the description. And of course, at the end of the video, we're going to have your links as well. For Amazon, you guys can get Jeff's wonderful books on Amazon. And your blog is jrnyquist.blog.
Yeah, .blog, that's right.
Right. And where else can we see you at besides here?
Oh, well, a lot of the MAGA podcasters won't have me anymore because they're pro-Russian, some of them. So you don't see me as much everywhere as you used to. But I do a podcast with Johnny Anderson, and every week with Trevor Loudon and Johnny Anderson and Jimmy from Brooklyn. So we do that pretty regularly.
Yeah, that's really great. And thank you for all your work. You're a wonderful teacher. And you're a great patriot. You're a good American. You're all these things, and you help us, learn all the things that we don't know about Russia and China. And so, I'm very happy to have you on the show, and we'll do it again soon. Do you have any final thoughts?
Well, thank you. You make me want to buy my own book.
Well, the origins of the Fourth World War, I think, you have to, I mean, that's a pretty pricey book. And so it's great. I was looking at it. I mean, it's in demand.
Yes, well, it's out of print. I have 50 in my garage. I'm planning to have a garage sale on my website. So that because I could sell them for 25 or 30 bucks a piece. But yeah, it's way up for way over $100 a book on there. But that shows that it's kept its value.
Oh, I think it's wonderful. I think it's wonderful. So thanks for coming on, and we'll see you soon.
All right. Thank you so much, Lauren.
Slava Ukraine.
Slava Ukraine.